and then I'll make it available to you if you want it. I'm also going to share the screen so we can show you some things along the way.
Okay.
Before we get going, was there anything in particular that you want to set in the way of context, like what you're thinking? What's your frame of reference? Are you thinking about portfolio companies, your company, prospective companies? What are you thinking?
Yeah, it would be for portfolio companies. So we're typically, Peter knows this, Brent, but we're typically working, the private equity firm, excuse me, will often refer us in to a portfolio company and ask us to do a Salesforce effectiveness study. And we will, we have a whole set of frameworks and methodologies, but one thing that we don't do very much of is assessment of the individual salespeople. We do, we have a sort of a rudimentary skills assessment that we do, and it's it doesn't have no kind of 360 element to it. It's really a rating by the salesperson on their skills, and then by the sales manager on sort of their desire and their attitude, and then we map those a little 2 by 2. And it's for a while we've been thinking we really need to upgrade that and pick up a tool that we could use that's more effective.
With more what?
That's more effective.
Yeah,
in terms of assessing the salespeople, particularly at the management level.
You're specifically focused on sales as opposed to executives, right?
Well, we're talking about typically the CSO, the head of sales and marketing, the head of sales, the head of marketing, and usually the first line of management underneath them. So it's those 3 levels.
It's interesting. I would say our assessment approach is oriented more towards the executive team, or actually any team, but in terms of how they are as executive, not in terms of how they are in particular with a set of skills. Like we have another company we work with that specifically does assessment of sales skills and aptitude.
Yeah.
That would be of interest to you. The focus of this is more, there is an element of functional skill depth, but it's not specific to sales.
Yeah, and so I actually kind of blurred the 2 things we do together. One is we'll be asked sometimes to assess the sales team, which is more the sister company you're talking about. The other, though, is by the private equity firm will sometimes be asked to assess the sales management team, and usually the first level underneath them. So it's going to be just a handful of people. Sometimes we're also asked to give our feedback on the CEO, but usually they do a CEO assessment independently.
And this is a diligence stage item, or?
Sometimes they're in the due diligence stage. Usually it's post-purchase during the first 100 days where they're trying to get the lay of the land.
Okay.
It's just too hard to have people do something of the depth, for example, that you're talking about when you're in due diligence stage.
Right. Okay.
Carter, what's a typical number of folks that are on teams that you feel need assessing?
So if it's the head of sales, head of marketing, and the CSO above that, that's 3. And sometimes it'll be 1 level below that, which could be another 4, something like that. So it's going to be anywhere from 3 to 7.
Okay. Well, just to set the context here, we have the notion of stages of maturity for a team in the organization that the team is responsible for, from sort of an idea stage to a startup to what we call credible, sustainable, and mature. And Brent and his colleagues from years ago have been studying organizations that have been successful at different stages for a couple of decades. And they have tens of thousands of data points they've collected and organized all of their findings into what we call ideal skill mix of top teams by stage of maturity. Yeah. So you end up with norms, like what does a skill mix have to look like if it wants to be a mix like those that have been successful at this stage in the next stage. And so they've developed a survey instrument that we use. And it's sort of well, he's going to take you through it. Let's do that by showing you a report from a report we've just finished for a client that I have up on the screen here. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a final deliverable. There are actually a few interim deliverables, but this will give you a quick summary. And Brent, I'll make it bigger, and Brent will walk through it a little bit for you to show you a couple of things.
Just real quick, Carter. So our approach, you'll see, consists of a structured interview with that's 33 items. That's one-on-one, strictly confidential, and I score that in relation to 9 core competencies that we can talk about in a second. And those are merged with a multi-rater, where you mentioned a 360, which is the 44-item online survey that a typical team will take.
Just to show you what that looks like, because we happen to have it up, it would be, there's an online, so everybody gets that and fills it out.
Yep. Okay.
And then,
so the skills that we assess fall into 3 buckets, and you'll see the figure 1 there on the screen. Know or knowledge skills, think or thinking skills, or act or execution skills. An easy way to think about this is ready, aim, fire. It's probably, more catchy, better way to think about it.
Yeah, there's what you know about something, and then how you think about what to do with what you know, and then there's what you actually do. So that's the know, think, act.
Yeah.
So the thinking is more sort of tactically, how am I going to take this intellectual knowledge and turn that into actual actions, and then the actions actually doing it?
Yes, in a sense, but it's also like a planning component. Like, how am I going to, what sequence of steps am I going to execute towards what end, and how and why is that going to work? So it's thoughtful planning. And we find, in going from startup to credible, that most of the teams we're working with are really, and to get a startup going, you've got to know a bunch of stuff and do a bunch of stuff. But to get to credible, you got to be much more thoughtful. What am I going to do? What am I trying to do? How am I going to deploy the resources towards that end? And then when I do something, stepping back and saying, now, what did I learn from that? And what can, sharing that with others on the team, and then coming back at it again at a better level, as opposed to just going to do more stuff. So that's what we're finding over and over is a real weakness.
Particularly in American companies, the knowledge skills are very high, and we're very big on execution, where we really want to act.
We Americans.
But the fault there is the thinking, is the innovation and creativity, it's the strategy, it's the analytic skills. So both the interview as well as the multi-rater questions target those kinds of skills.
Did you do a mapping of the questions to those 3 areas, or do you summarize it for the person?
Exactly. You'll see in a minute how we show that, but that's exactly what we do.
Okay.
But here are the know, think, act. And each bar represents one of the 3. And of course, each of the 3 are made up of components as well. So there's a lot of subparts. But when you aggregate it, you get the stages of venture maturity, and then the skill mix norm for success, or success norm, or relative mix. So you want to have a lot of action when you're going from idea to startup. And you want to know a bunch of stuff and do a bunch of stuff, but thinking is less important. And when you get to credible, you still want to do a lot, but thinking starts to take a much bigger piece of the action if you're going to be successful than knowing. It's not what you know, it's how you think about how to use what you know, and then going out and doing it. And so each stage is a little bit different.
Yeah, so Carter, the philosophy behind this is there's no such thing as a perfect leader. And there's no such thing as a perfect team. So the question is, how do you balance the competencies, strengths, and gaps of a team so that you can leverage the strengths of everybody on it? And so what this figure 1 shows is the ideal based on successful companies that have been researched and that are in my publications, which are down below there in the small font. And what we found is that the successful companies had this kind of executive competency mix.
Explain to me on the mature one.
Yeah.
I think in the article you didn't have those decline slash lines.
Yeah, we've been giving this a lot of thought, and I think the way to look at this is that there's 2 different kinds of success in a mature. One is a wind down, where you're sort of just done and it matures out, and that's the down portfolio here, the down profile here. The other, though, is essentially a series of startups inside a mature company where you have a lot of new ventures sort of going through this whole pattern again. And then that would look more like this.
So you're kind of reinventing yourself at that point. Is it?
Usually in a portfolio of reinventions, right? It's not just one thing, but we have a lot of companies that we've worked with that have one thing that's really successful and that's kind of the engine, and they have 6 initiatives, each of which is essentially a startup.
Yeah, I would have expected thinking to have been higher during that reinvention stage, but it's interesting.
Actually, you're wrong there, because if you look even back here, it's not about thinking, it's about doing stuff.
Yeah, so I understand that in the concept stage.
Even in startup, relatively, right?
Yeah.
Thinking doesn't become important, until you're going to relatively important when you get from startup to credible, but in sustainable, it's all about that. It's all about setting up systems and processes, and how do we do things, learn from what we've done, and revitalize and lay in new procedures once we figured out what works.
Okay. Interesting.
Another point just on this last thing here, Carter, is a question I get is people will say, oh, well, gee, Brent, you're saying thinking's not important. And the issue is that they're all important. The question is the relative balance.
Relative to each other. Yeah, I got it. Okay, got it.
Which one dominates? And what you'll find is, one of the interesting things is we help a group see how they are and how the success to them would say they need to be. And then they can decide what to do about that. They could hire some more people that are more thoughtful, or they can set up more steps along their way in their own processes, or they can develop some of their people to be that. But once you know it, it gets the right conversations going to drive it in the right direction.
So this has implications for succession. It has implications for learning and development. It has implications for replacement as
hiring.
And hiring as well.
Yeah.
Here's an example of a chart that comes out at the team level. We have one of these for each person as well.
Yeah, and we can show that to you. But here is the team. You'll see to the left there, skill. This is the knowledge or the ready skill, the depth. And these are the details of what's composed underneath the knowledge skills: functional knowledge, industry knowledge, organization knowledge. And then we've taken the names off because the names are confidential. What's important is the what, not really the who. You'll see a little bit later, we give individual reports of the individual that we're looking at. But these are the aggregated scores then.
Let me mention something.
Yeah.
When you say functional, that would be the equivalent of a business function such as sales.
Yeah.
And an industry would be the industry that you're serving. An organization would be your organization and how things work therein.
Yeah. How well do you know your industry and the competition and their strategy, et cetera? How well do you know your own organization and how it functions?
Both in your own mind, how well you know it, and then how well does everybody else think you know it. So you're getting a multi-rater on each of these dimensions.
Yeah.
So just a quick question on that. So on the functional, does this vary by person, or is this just saying how well do they know their function?
How well they know their function.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And what the perception is of other people in terms of their knowledge of their own.
Remember, it's not just one question feeding that. It's a multiple portfolio of questions for each of these.
Yeah, we have 4 or 5 questions for each. So as you can see to the extreme right, this team is not too bad. I'd give them a B, maybe, a middle B.
In the 80s.
Because they're in the 80s. Whereas when we get to think, just looking down, you look at an analytical skills, innovation, creativity, and strategy skills. Oh boy, now we're talking about a real need here, particularly in innovation and creativity, which we find a lot. Those scores seem to always be low. So we're talking C, C minus here. And then when we get to action or the execution side, we see planning, communication, and execution skills. And again, there's some real need there, particularly on the planning side. That's the lowest score of all of the 9 competencies. And so here to the right of that, Peter's just showing a summary.
Okay, the summary by know, think, act, and then a summary overall. And this is what would compare to this chart here.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And a lot of times, well, invariably the team would find this a fascinating chart and spend a good deal of time sort of assessing themselves. But what we want to do now is take you down into an individual and their data and show you how that ends up looking and what kind of insights you get from it, right?
I think that's 31.
No, 2026. Right? Christian.
Oh, okay.
So here's an individual on that team.
Yeah, this person, Carter, was the COO and was still functioning as a COO. But as you'll see, there's some concerns about his stepping up to the plate in that role. On the functional knowledge, the industry, and the organization, we see pretty high scores there, the total being 92% of all of those. Again, all of the other names are confidential. Only this person sees their own scores. So that's the ready. With the aim, we see analytic skills, innovation, creativity, and strategy skills. Here we see a little bit of slippage, particularly on innovation and creativity, about a middle C level there, with a total score of 81%. And then with execution or act skills or fire, if we're talking about it in terms of ready, aim, fire, we see the scores are slipping again even more, particularly on the planning side. Only 69% was mentioned there.
And notice his own score is in the yellow. So he's given himself a 14, which is higher than anybody else has given him by a significant amount. So you see a little bit of self-concept, self-image out of alignment there.
Yeah, this is very interesting and much better to have an evidence-based tool rather than me as a consultant saying, well, gee, you overrate yourself. It's not me. This is what the team is saying in comparison to what he's saying about himself.
Can you scroll up again? I just want to see what those, total and noise. Up again.
Yeah.
Wait, what is total is a sum of all of them. What is this?
That's the highest you could possibly have gotten was 75.
Oh, okay.
Got 73, so that's 97%.
And all of these, you don't sort of do a deviation to indicate how consistent the data was. Would you do that later?
You can. The data is there to do it with, but no, we haven't found it needed to be done. It's it's only 5 data points or 7.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's not like you have a big group. Yeah.
And remember, we don't want to get lost in the data or overanalyze the data. It's really more to get the right things on the table, and then the CEO or whoever's leader of the team can run with it again with our help usually. Because really, what this gets us to is the right conversation to develop the team. Yeah. And we try not to get too lost in the data, but the data is there and it does say some basic things that give us what we need to run with. You want to go to that?
So we can scroll down if you'd like, Carter, and get to some of the narrative.
Hold on.
Let's see.
There you go.
Oh, no, I get to...
Oh, you want to do just up?
I was just going to...
Okay, here you go.
So we summarize it here in a narrative form. And again, we point out on this particular executive that his self-ratings were either slightly higher or somewhat higher, or more or less even. And that is an excellent executive coaching point to get this person to really delve into, gee, what's the effect of that on my day-to-day business decisions and my interaction with other people. So this is another reason why I can use it successfully. Let's go down to 31, I think it is.
Correction.
Yeah. So this is towards the end of the report, and Peter and I summarize what we feel both the executive interviews and the multi-rater data is telling us.
And we will review this with the leader to be sure the leader agrees. And if leader wants to question, tweak, or sort of emphasize one thing over another. But our objective here is not to overwhelm the recipient, but to hone in on the most important things to focus on next. And that would be with the leader's help, because we want to do it in support of the leader working with the person.
Yeah. So these are all summarized pretty well, and we find this is a valuable part just to pull it all together and give our recommendation. So again, there's no guarantee of business success, but at least we can increase the odds that any business will succeed if they have the right mix of skills with their people and with their team.
Yes.
So, sorry, did you finish? I have a couple
Yeah,
questions.
go ahead. Go ahead.
So, the first thing is, how, when you go into an organization, you asked me about how many people we were thinking of. What do you normally, who do you normally assess in the organization? How many levels?
You can do it with any team, the top person and up to the next, say, 5 or 6. So 6 or 7 might be the most that we would do in this framing.
Okay.
So
And
could be the CEO, the CFO, the CTO, and CMO, CSO, that top team. Or if it was a business unit or a functional unit, it would be the leader and the top 5.
you guys underneath them. Okay. And how long does the process usually take? Is it 2 or 3 weeks, I'm guessing?
Well, that's if you blitz it. I mean, usually you got to give them a couple of weeks to fill it out. Then we got to take a week or 10 days for us to aggregate the data and then review it with the CEO, factor in that input, and come up with the messaging to the individuals and prepare the final report. So, 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And is this prescriptive part at the end? Does it talk about the kinds of training that they should do, or?
Yeah. Generally, if almost always we have some suggestion along those lines, and we will either include it or not, depending upon, again, whether the leader is inclined to be accommodating or interested in that. Because sometimes they just don't want to include that, because then people will want to do it, and if they don't do it, it's not good. But we will usually think of a couple of different, like a supervisory skills training, a sales training, executive leadership training, or coaching, those sorts of things. We will record, and we'll even refer to published documents, stuff that we have, stuff that others have done that would be good for a given individual or a team to focus on.
And who do you usually refer them to for that kind of training? Do you do that, or do you refer them to AMA or something? Or
used to work at AMA.
AMA is I used to be a director of organization development at AMA in New York City.
Okay.
So sure, there's DDI. There's also local boutique consulting firms that the organization may already be familiar with and have a relationship with. So,
and then we do coaching. We do coaching. We do executive reviews for teams or individuals. And there's usually also just texts, and we have a lot of content that we make available as part of this.
And what about customization? Do you ever customize it for a specific company, or do you find that the customization would then throw off your ability to get proper metrics?
We could probably.
We can certainly add questions.
Same thing.
That
can add, but not.
Yeah, but of course that would disrupt the database. But that still means that we could do subjective feedback on a collective of comments from added on questions.
Especially if we have the core, which is the 44 questions, and we can have any number of other questions if you or the CEO want to ask, or the leader wants to add them, and you either treat them separately or not at all.
Yeah.
We also do have an individual assessment mechanism for multi-rater evaluation of each person relative to what they're good at, what they've done to contribute, how they've grown, and what they should focus on next. And that often we do in parallel. So it's a little bit of a separate process that we didn't take you through here today, but just know we also offer that. And a lot of times we do that initially just for the CEO or the leader, because a lot of times the team and the leader are a little bit disjointed, and it's partly because the leader is not hearing what the team has to say to the leader about the leader.
Yeah. The individual assessment, it seems like this would work. Is it the same methodology, but different questions, or is it?
Yeah, it's really just 5 questions. It's actually, in this particular one, all here.
Yeah, you might as well show it to them.
So here's a quick view of that. For this particular individual, it's what is this person's key strengths? And then it's codified here. So red underline means basically everybody on the team said the same thing to this guy. And if it was red but not underlined, everybody but 1. If it's black, it means everybody but 3. And if it's just like, if it's not bolded, then it's just 1 or 2 people said it. Okay. What we do is take what they say and consolidate it and hone it and review it with the leader to make sure that we're communicating. And then again, also with the team. So we talk to the team about what they're saying to each individual. So we do a meeting where each person leaves the room and we talk about the data that we've collected from them about that person who's left the room before we come up with the final report for the person. And then present all of that back to the team in aggregate, to the CEO for each person, and then work with the CEO to administer it to each person. So it's quite an interesting and useful process. And it's
let me just make sure I understood what you said, because that was, I would not expect that approach. You asked the person who's being assessed to leave, and then you all talk about him or her in the room?
Yeah, because we've collected data on that person from everybody in the room, right, including from the person. We've consolidated that, reviewed it with the CEO, the leader, and then what we're doing now is saying to the team, here's what we're going to say is the most important things to say to this person. Remember, the first 3 questions are all edifying. What's he good at? What's he contributed? How's he grown? So there's no issues with those. That's all good stuff. So the real question is, what are the top 3 things this person needs to focus on next? And, you know, there's a long list, right? There's 20 things. We want to get that down to the top 3 and working with the CEO or the leader. And then the leader wants to work with the team to say, is this really what we want this guy to do? And if everybody agrees with that, you know, now we have clarity, alignment, and everybody knows what everybody is trying to do.
Yeah.
And before
that's
pretty powerful.
A lot of transparency in that. You have to have a strong team to do that. That's great.
That is right. We do have to have a strong team, or it can be done. Actually, I've done this with entire organizations, but you do it, you level it. So you wouldn't talk to the people the next level down. You would talk only with people who level up about
their peers. Yeah.
Right. So you go up a level.
So I think what's most unique is with this narrative and subjective part, you get depth. And with the multi-rater, you get depth, but you also get breadth. Put them together and, you know, it's pretty powerful. We have a real good view of what a person's like and how they behave.
And for the leaders of these teams that we do this for, the biggest lift they get is forcing them to get clear about what they've got in each person, what they need to have in each person, and how they're going to get it there, and then how to communicate that and then get it.
Yeah.
As a CEO myself, I've found that's one of the most important things a CEO does and needs to do, but most don't know how to do it. So this is a very simple set of tools that empower the CEO to do that.
How do you charge for it? Do you charge per person or per project? Or?
For the basic things we're telling you here, it's per person. And then for the ongoing, if you wanted ongoing support, coaching support could be against a retainer, or a series of reviews could be review meetings on a monthly or quarterly basis.
And how much is it per person?
$3,500 per person for the skill mix, and then $5,000 per person for the whole thing.
And again, what's interesting, the 35 and the 5, what's left out of the 35?
The second, the individual one.
For the individual assessment.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Is a sample of both in that?
Yeah. The one that's online that I pointed you to is not this one. It's not this one, but it's another one, and it has both.
Okay, good. Very interesting. And do you guys actually execute this yourself, or do you have other people that you have executed?
We're the guys.
Okay.
We're the ones. Okay. We you know, actually, believe it or not, we usually try to train the group we're working with to do it on their own. At least the individual one is something that can be done annually and doesn't really need our help. We can train internal people to do it. It's really the will of the leader. If they want to do it, there's really nothing stopping them once we've done it a couple of times for you. The other one we don't recommend doing every year. It's too much, but you could do it every 3 years, and that we would continue to help with.
That's the interview part.
Yeah.
You don't do that every year.
Yeah.
That has to be done by an individual person. Yeah. But my guess is you get huge benefit the first time you do it, and
exactly.
Then you're getting 80% then, and then another 20% every year or every other year if you do it again.
Right. On the skill mix one, on the individual one, you can get pretty darn high lift every year.
Really interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
How many of these do you typically do a year? How many companies a year do you work with?
A handful.
Yeah.
But we can do more. We've been more and more focused on this because we like doing it. It's a huge impact. But
yeah, it's fun. And how'd you get into this? Did this come out of your
I I invented my part of this as the individual. And so in the 80s, I was working with a guy like Brent, but not Brent, who helped me invent it after doing a study of how everybody did assessment and development of executives. We invented it and then rolled it out. And I've been doing it ever since. Wherever I go, I do this. Now I help other people do it. And Brent's been doing this for
about 15 years now.
Yeah. And so you added more content to the questions, Brent, or what was your?
Yeah, I tweaked them. I tweaked the interview.
And we blended our two methodologies. I took
put them together.
I have the stages of venture evolution, the concept start, and then the characteristics of each stage, like how do you rigorously define what makes it that you're here versus there, up against his model of norms by stage. And the two just overlap very nicely. We came together about 3 years ago on that. And that's been extremely powerful. We love working with each other on it.
Great. How'd you guys meet each other, connect on this?
We met at a professional association meeting here in San Francisco of the Organization Development Network.
Yeah.
I was speaking and hosting a session, and did a raffle of my book. And he won the raffle.
I won the book.
The rest is history.
I love it.
I had to read it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You did too, by the way.
That's great. That's great. Well, I appreciate you going through this. I think one of the things that we need to do is start to think, as I mentioned before, of how we can be more rigorous in the work we're doing. And it seems like this would apply pretty well. It obviously applies better if you do the CEO and his management team. But if we were to do it even at the CSO level,
I think it would work, yeah.
It would work. We do CSO, head of sales, head of marketing, and maybe one level below that. I'm not sure yet. In that the online thing that you gave me, I guess I could download that and show it to a couple of the other guys.
You can show some other guys, and I'm going to give you this tape.
Okay, good.
A link. It'll be a link to this exactly what you've just seen here. And you can to your
Good.
What we would ideally like is sort of, if you've got an organization in mind, you want to do a pilot. That's probably the way to go. Just try it.
Yeah, let me think about that a little bit. I don't have anyone in mind right now, but I can see the value of it, and particularly in an organization that has gone through some change or is about to go through some change, and you really need to get prepared for that.
Right. Like if there's a new leader or a new member, that tends to be a good time to do it.
Yeah. Great.
All right. Well, it's been good spending time with you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Nice to meet you, Brent. Okay. See you later. Bye.
Hey.